Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, save the date, everyone, because we're talking about Friday, the 5th of June, where you can join us for the LLG Spring Conference. This is a 2-day hybrid event bringing together legal and local government professionals from across the sector. And day one takes place on the Friday, that's the 5th of June, as I said, at the Eastside Rooms, Birmingham, with the option to attend in person or online. Although I would encourage you to attend in person because the full day programme features expert plenary sessions, opportunities to engage with local government leaders and legal specialists, and space for discussion and knowledge sharing. And in-person delegates not only will receive all of that, but they'll be able to explore our corporate partners exhibition, take part in additional programmes, and of course, network with peers. And refresh yourself. It's lovely to meet up with old friends again. And the day will continue with the LLG Awards ceremony and dinner hosted at the same venue. And that is a lovely celebration of all that legal talent out there. Day two, as usual, will be held the following week. It'll be online only, and it'll offer further plenary sessions and very much more focused on governance and practical improvement. So don't miss this opportunity to learn, connect, and develop your personal and professional network. Personal, yes, that as well. So you can find all the details on the events page of the LLG website. But let's turn to the podcast. Dennis, what's our first item of today?
We return to the Court of Appeal decision in Mazur with the question, what does it mean? Exactly what the judgment means for how law firms and organisations practice, incidentally, was due to be discussed last week, Tuesday the 17th of April, when the Law Society hosted a free lunchtime webinar to answer that question, and recordings of that, I'm sure, are still available online. And an updated practice note from the Society was published on Monday, the 13th of April.
Well, hardly a surprise that the 31st of March ruling was greeted with a collective sigh of relief, not least, of course, by legal executives. And I'll just make a note here to say that we mustn't forget the stress and professional effect that had on our legal executives, and my thoughts were with them throughout all of that period of uncertainty. But the detail of the judgment is just as important as the final outcome for what it reveals about the future. So, overturning the first instance decision of Mr. Justice Sheldon, the court found that an authorised person, as we know, can conduct litigation under the supervision of an authorised person, providing that the authorised person remains responsible for the conduct of that litigation. And that's the rub, that bit there.
Yes, that is the crux of the matter, Helen, that we're going to look at today. What does proper supervision now look like? Now, giving the lead judgment, Lord Justice Burse said there had always been a widespread and well-regulated practice of delegation by solicitors, and that the Legal Services Act had not changed this position. The crucial element was that solicitors or authorised legal executives should retain responsibility for the tasks that they delegate to unauthorised individuals.
Yeah, so the court said that the delegation of tasks by the authorised individual to the unauthorised person requires proper direction, management supervision and control, and made clear the details were a matter for regulators. The authorised individual must put in place appropriate arrangements to ensure compliance. And in the underlying case, litigants in person, Julia Mazur and Jerome Stewart, challenged a costs bill on the basis that an authorised person handled the litigation. I don't expect they thought that this would start a stream of events. The court said that there was no doubt that the supervising solicitor bore the relevant responsibility for the proceedings and was carrying on the conduct of litigation.
Silex, which brought the appeal, had submitted that someone carrying on the conduct of litigation was the person directing and controlling the performance of a given task. Burse clarified that carrying on also involves a degree of direction or responsibility for it. Both Lady Justice Andrews and Sir Geoffrey Voss also agreed, and Andrews said that, in essence, The question was whether the unauthorised person, in carrying out whatever tasks that fall within the scope of the conduct of litigation, had been delegated to them, was in truth acting on behalf of the authorised individual.
Yeah, she stressed that there must always be an authorised person delegating tasks and taking responsibility, adding, if the reality is that the litigation is not being conducted by the authorised person for and on behalf of the authorised individual, they will be committing an offence. Now, the Court of Appeal has been explicit. Delegation requires proper direction management, supervision, and control.
And the authorised individual must put in place appropriate supervisory arrangements for non-admitted persons, and we'll come on to this later. The
Mm.
level of oversight must match the circumstances. And in short, the principle of delegation is restored, but the standard of supervision is not whatever we were doing before September 2025 when the case was first brought forward.
Yeah, no, that's an important point, Dennis. So, partnership advisors CM Murray also stressed that the Court of Appeal's decision places the onus on authorised persons and firms to have effective systems of delegation and supervision. And he said, I quote him here, I think best. What amounts to effective supervision will depend on the facts and risk profile of the case, as well as the level of experience of the unauthorised person, and can vary from active supervision of individual matters to conducting regular meetings with the authorised person and sampling the work, the firm said. Regulators will clearly need to provide further and more refined guidance on supervision in light of this judgment.
And they added, firms will accordingly want to document their supervision arrangements and their rationale for differing levels of supervision. Firstly, for their own risk management process. Secondly, in order to ensure regulatory compliance. And we're talking here Rule 2.2 of the Solicitors Code of Conduct for Firms that requires firms to keep and maintain records to demonstrate regulatory compliance. And thirdly, to be able to preempt any queries from opponents or indeed the court. Of course, as CM Murray went on to acknowledge, the scope for challenge by opposing parties is now likely to be greatly diminished. Particularly, they say, as in the vast majority of the cases, the litigation will be being conducted perfectly adequately and competently by the unauthorised person, meaning there is no reason to suspect that supervision is ineffective or indeed inadequate.
Well, yeah, I think the risk of effective challenge is greatly diminished, but I still think that we will see challenges as a kind of ditch effort for a little while. That would be my prediction. But then, as we know, Dennis, I get things wrong with an alarming frequency about what
Well,
happens.
I think Helen, you raise an important point though, because whilst one type of challenge may not surface again, the question of challenges in relation to costs and who's doing the
Yeah,
work, I think as we come on to discuss later, there are particular challenges that could arise in local government in relation to local government legal practice in terms of governance
yeah.
and whether we're following the right procedures in supervising unadmitted staff. And the risks, I think, are different, but still there in that respect.
Yeah, yeah. So, in a nutshell, Mazur has actually changed things because the Court of Appeal has clarified the nature of the supervision of unadmitted persons conducting litigation, and the court spelled out that different levels of supervision are required in different circumstances. That's an important one to note, and that supervisors will need to assess risks in a transparent fashion to demonstrate compliance with the legal rules.
Now, as for the regulators, they clearly got this all wrong, but they still have a key role in shaping how things work in future. Now, in our second Mazur piece today, we look at what Mazur means specifically for local authorities.
Yes, so more on that later. But in the meantime, let's turn our attention to Wales because, as always, England can often take some lessons. So, this is the news that Audit Wales has said it's working closely with the local government sector in Wales to share good practice and help rebuild a sustainable and timely accounts process. And they say that remains one of its paramount priorities. And that's sort of a joining along its published annual plan for 2026-27.
Audit plays a critical role in public accountability, particularly in a period of sustained financial pressure across the UK public sector. The Welsh audit system, as set out in Audit Wales's annual plan, presents a markedly different picture from the more fragile audit landscape currently seen in England.
Yeah, the Audit Wales annual plan sets out a comprehensive and integrated programme of work covering financial audit, performance audit, value for money studies, and governance assurance across the Welsh public sector. And the plan emphasises three enduring purposes, and that's ensuring that public money is well managed, explaining how it's spent, and driving improvement across public services.
Notably, Wales continues to operate a single national public audit body, combining functions that in England are fragmented across multiple organisations. Audit Wales works directly under the statutory independence of the Auditor General for Wales, reporting to the Senedd rather than to ministers. And this clarity of accountability underpins the credibility and coherence of the Welsh audit regime.
Well, recent plans also highlight operational priorities rather than structural upheaval. So these include, excuse me, improving audit timeliness, rebuilding accounts delivery to what we saw pre-pandemic standards, strengthening value for money reporting, and increasing the use of digital and data-driven audit techniques. And whilst Wales has not been immune, of course, to pressures, its audit system is focused on recovery and improvement as opposed to wholesale redesign.
Indeed. And the situation in England stands in sharp contrast. Over the past several years, the English local audit system has experienced severe backlogs, as we've previously reported, and diminished assurance and a loss of public confidence. By late 2023, only 1% of local government bodies had published audited accounts on time, with a cumulative backlog peaking at over 900 unaudited accounts.
Yeah, that's right. We've touched on that before. So, in response, the UK government has embarked on a major reform programme, including statutory backstop dates to clear the backlog and proposals to abolish the existing fragmented arrangements in favour of a new local audit office for England. That's well spoken about. These reforms are substantial, but they do also acknowledge that the current system well, frankly, has fundamentally failed to provide timely assurance or, crucially, effective early warning of financial distress.
England's model relies heavily on private audit firms, central procurement, and complex regulatory oversight, all of which have been cited as contributing factors to capacity constraints and misaligned incentives. While reform efforts are progressing, the system remains in transition and carries ongoing risk.
Yeah, the comparison is interesting. Wales demonstrates the advantages of institutional stability, I would say, clear statutory accountability, and it seems an integrated audit model aligned with democratic oversight, whereas England, by contrast, it seems to me, is attempting to rebuild assurance through reform after prolonged systemic underperformance. So, perhaps they ought to look across the border. But for professionals, the Welsh audit plan does reinforce the value of a coherent, purpose-led audit function that balances, or at least attempts to balance, scrutiny with improvement. And as England reshapes its audit system, the Welsh experience does provide a practical reference point for what a resilient public audit framework can look like in practice, I would say. But Dennis, let's now return again, as promised, to Mazur.
Yes, we now look at the Mazur decision in the context of local authorities and, more importantly, what we think you should be doing. In this second look today at the Mazur case, we look in more detail at the specific implications for local authority legal services departments. The Court of Appeal clarified, as we've explained, that litigation tasks may be delegated to non-authorised staff, but only where proper supervision is exercised by an authorised person. So we'll now take a canter through what the elements of a good supervision structure might look like.
Yeah, well, following Mazur delegation is permitted, but the authorised lawyer must retain control of the case, responsibility for decisions and active supervision. So this is relevant to local authority legal teams in particular because typically they operate on high volume litigation, particularly in the areas of housing, antisocial behaviour, regulatory work, debt recovery, and of course, childcare.
And they rely heavily upon paralegals, junior staff, and of course Silex practitioners without litigation rights. And we know that this model remains lawful, but only if supervision arrangements are robust and demonstrable. Nevertheless, the key risk for local authorities is that non-authorised staff are, in substance, conducting litigation without proper supervision.
Yeah, and this doesn't just pertain to legal teams because there are numerous client teams that may be falling into this area. We don't know yet. We're going to do some work on that. I'll mention that at the end. But this may arise where files are effectively run independently by junior staff. And then actually, this can apply to the private sector. Of course, it can.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
or supervisors may have nominal or insufficient involvement in cases, and there may be no, crucially, audit trail for decision making. And indeed, external parties may perceive an unauthorised person as having the conduct of the case. And I think the risk remains that non compliance may lead to a breach of the Legal Services Act, regulatory exposure, a challenge to the proceedings, especially on costs, as we've said, Dennis. Then you've got reputational damage, or key for us, governance failure requiring some degree of escalation.
So, what governance controls are required to ensure compliance post-Mazur? To ensure compliance, the authority must clearly ensure there is a clear allocation of responsibility and that each case must have a named authorised lawyer and a designated case handler. And there must be an effective supervision framework involving active, as you've said, active and ongoing supervision of each matter.
Yeah, and the supervisor must be involved in key stages of litigation, including the issue of proceedings, pleadings, settlement decisions. And there must be a clear documented audit trail, and records should include details of supervision, approval of key steps, and decision making responsibility.
And there must be key escalation protocols covering key strategic decisions, legal risk issues, and settlement and admission decisions in individual cases. And of course, training. Training must be such that staff understand the limits of their authority and when to escalate matters elsewhere.
Mm. Well, examples are emerging in various online legal resources of formal supervision policies for litigation supervision in legal teams. And we would definitely commend the use of such policies, obviously adapted to your own local authority circumstance. File audits should be conducted regularly, and compliance issues should be reported through governance structures with any risks escalated appropriately. Now, local authorities already commonly use checklists for litigation matters, and these should be amended to include a standardised file checklist that incorporates all of the issues discussed here.
And arrangements should also be put in place for mandatory training for litigation staff on supervision requirements, plus a periodic compliance reporting arrangement, which should also be put in place as well. Many councils, of course, will already have these arrangements in place, but please do review them. And of course, those councils with Lexel are likely already to have fully documented procedures, but these will again need to be reviewed in line with the requirements that we're discussing today.
That's right. And we will be going out with a date soon for our roundtable members to discuss implications and of Mazur, and there'll be a specific dedicated session, of course, at our spring conference, which is another reason to attend in person. And I was just
Indeed.
thinking, Dennis, actually, this whole Mazur case really does support the view that lawyers in local government should have paid for practicing certificates by their local authority, because I know that's not actually the case everywhere, and that some people are having to pay from their own pockets, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
well, that's true. And can I say, just reflecting on what we've been discussing today, what really has happened with Mazur is it started off as a litigation issue discussing costs and so forth. It was a costs challenge. But in local government, this is a governance question above all things, I think.
Yeah. No, that's an important point to pull out from it, Dennis. Now, let's take a turn to a new and sweeping Principal Acts. So, because from the 1st of May, local authorities across England will take on significantly expanded responsibilities under the Renters' Rights Act. And that's marking one of the most far reaching reforms of the private rented sector in decades. And to support this shift, the government's announced that it will be producing a £60 million funding package to strengthen councils' enforcement capacity and prepare the wider justice system, it says, for the changes. I actually haven't done a calculation as to what that means per authority, but
Yeah. Well, of the total funding, £41.12 million is new resource allocated this April, building on an £8.2 million already provided to councils in autumn of last year. All 317 local authorities will receive a share of the funding, which is intended to support staffing, training, and operational readiness as new legal protections for an estimated 11 million private renters come into force.
well, as we've discussed previously on the podcast, the Act introduces a ban on Section 21 no fault evictions, alongside broader protections aimed at tackling unfair practices such as rental bidding, discrimination against families and benefit recipients, and poor standards linked to rogue landlords. And crucially, councils will now have a clear statutory duty to enforce compliance with these new rules rather than relying previously on discretionary powers.
Enforcement tools are also being strengthened. Maximum civil penalties for serious or repeat offences will rise to £40,000, up from £30,000, and rent repayment orders will increase from a maximum of 1 year's rent to two. Tenants will also be able to challenge breaches going back up to 2 years. These changes build on earlier reforms introduced in December, which expanded councils' investigatory powers, including access to third-party financial information and the ability to enter premises without prior notice in certain circumstances.
Yeah, well, alongside local authority funding, wider system investment is intended to ensure the reforms operate effectively in practice. So, up to 50 million will be invested in modernising civil courts, including digitalisation processes to support more efficient handling of housing cases. I know there's still lengthy backlogs there. And in addition, a further 5 million per year will be directed towards fee uplifts in the housing legal aid sector, supporting continued access to advice and representation for renters facing eviction.
Now, from a governance and regulatory perspective, the reforms shift the balance firmly towards proactive enforcement. For councils, the challenge will be how to translate those enhanced powers and funding into consistent, timely action on the ground. For landlords, particularly those operating responsibly, the new framework aims to raise standards across the sector while targeting the minority whose practices undermine tenant security and confidence.
Well, as implementation begins, attention is likely to focus on how effectively councils are resourced over the longer term and how enforcement is prioritised locally to ensure the new rights deliver meaningful change in practice. One way I think they could do it is bring back all the old tenancy enforcement officers
Indeed.
and housing advisors. That was incredibly effective, but it all got cut out years ago. So.
Mm,
Now then, lots of work I think we should just acknowledge for local authorities there and for legal teams in
yes.
respect of that act. Now let's move on to something else because there's been a lot of talk about the SQE and the SQE failure rates. And now Legal Futures have sought the views of those who have actively taken the SQE or are currently taking it, Dennis.
Indeed. 8 out of 10 current and former solicitor qualifying examination candidates do not consider the exam is fit for purpose or indeed good value for money. So says a survey by the National Junior Lawyers Division. The NJLD said there were structural issues with the SQE requiring urgent attention and called, among other things, for the cost structure to be reviewed.
This is really interesting. So, when we've talked about the SQC previously, but almost half of candidates, 44%, reported that the total cost of the SQE, including exams and preparatory courses, was or would likely be over £10,000. I mean, if we go 25 years ago, it was about seven, actually, as was
Mm.
said. Um, The group, which is attached to the Law Society, said the survey findings reflected a consistent and deeply felt set of concerns across factors such as cost, accessibility, transparency, employer readiness, and candidate welfare. And the NJLD recognises that the SQE was still a relatively new system and that some transitional difficulty was inevitable.
They say it further recognises that many candidates have successfully completed the SQE on the path to qualification, and that accurately surveying and synthesising the views of this cohort is indeed challenging. However, they say the strength and consistency of the evidence gathered here suggests that there are several structural issues that require urgent attention. The NJLD said 476 candidates completed the survey last year, which was self-selecting in terms of respondents rather than randomised. As a result, it should be read as strongly indicative of individual candidate experience rather than statistically representative of the entire SQE candidate population.
Well, the University of Law was the most widely used provider of preparatory courses for the SQE, followed then by BPP and Barbary, BARBRI. That's a new one on me, I have to say.
You
Uh,
on me too.
yeah, a large minority of candidates, 37%, so that's not insignificant, said that their course only prepared them somewhat for the exam, while in fact 3% said not at all, which is alarming. Um, Almost two-thirds of candidates, standing at 63%, did not regard their preparatory course as good value for money.
And a majority had difficulties booking their SQE assessments, 27% citing significant or extreme problems.
Mm.
Quote, qualitative feedback frequently cited the first come, first served booking system, the limited test centre availability, and the requirement to pay within a short window of receiving a booking slot. Again, they said several respondents reported queuing online for extended periods only to find no available centres in their region.
Shouldn't be like that, should
It
it? I
shouldn't.
mean, I
Sounds
don't
bad.
understand. No, I don't understand why the educational establishments aren't facilitating the exam. But
Yeah.
I suppose it's to do with the flexibility now of when you're sitting it. I don't know
Mm.
actually. I'd be interested to know, so please do contact me if anyone's currently undertaking it. Nearly half of all candidates experienced difficulties on the examination day itself. That must have been terribly
Yeah.
frustrating. Most commonly, technical failures, inadequate test centre facilities, and the need to travel long distances to sit the exams. And of the 80 candidates who required reasonable adjustments, only half reported they were provided adequately, and that is simply not on.
No.
A significant minority of candidates rated the SQE resit and appeal process as, quote, terrible, with 16% rating it as poor, but um, only 15% rated it as good. That's quite alarming.
It is. It's all shocking, really. And the NGLD went on to say the escalating cost of resits was a recurring theme,
Mm.
alongside dissatisfaction with the three attempt limit, the perceived lack of transparency in the appeals process, and the absence of detailed feedback on failed assessments. None of this sounds good.
Well, the single strongest negative finding in the survey related to value for money. 82%, in fact, said it was not good value for money in terms of administration and examination fees, whilst 44% of candidates reported some understanding and support for the SQE process from employers, but nearly 20% received none at all.
Mm. The 172 detailed responses from candidates to a question about their mental health and well-being, quote, conveyed consistent themes of exhaustion, isolation, anxiety,
Mm.
and financial stress. And the NJLD called on the legal profession to engage seriously with the findings, calling for the cost structure to be reviewed, including resit fees, quote, with a view to ensuring affordability and proportionality. Helen, this does not paint a very good picture at all.
No, and it doesn't encourage social mobility either, especially now that the level seven apprentice scheme has been scrapped by the government, which was the qualification route outside of the more stringent and financially pressured way of qualifying. So, and we haven't yet either talked about embedded bias and discrimination within the SQE. We have previously on the Grapevine, but I think also that's another angle that needs to be properly understood, because I don't think anyone's got to grips yet about the staggering disparity in pass rates when you take backgrounds into account. So now let's move to our last item today. The Ethics and Integrity Commission published last week a report by Dr. Rebecca Dobson-Phillips on the institutions that regulate standards in public life in the UK. And the report focuses on Westminster and Whitehall local government and functions that are governed by central agencies. So this report was commissioned by the Ethics and Integrity Commission, and it's an updated version of a report which was commissioned to mark the 25th anniversary of the Committee on Standards in Public Life.
The publication, which is entitled Ethics and Integrity Institutions Mapping UK Standards in Public Life, provides a timely and comprehensive overview of how ethical regulation across the UK has evolved over more than 3 decades and what challenges might lie ahead. Commissioned by the newly established Ethics and Integrity Commission, the EIC, the report offers a snapshot of a standards ecosystem at a pivotal moment, shaped by declining public trust, institutional strain, and increasingly complex governance risks.
Yes, so the report traces the origins of the current system to the creation of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. That was in 1994. And basically, that followed a high-profile parliamentary scandal that exposed weaknesses in ethical oversight. Can you imagine? Over its 30-year lifespan, the committee did play a formative role in embedding the 7 principles of public life. And these principles, which commentators regularly describe as the golden thread of the UK standards framework. Obviously, the Nolan principles remain the foundation of ethical regulation today and continue to command a broad public and international recognition.
However, the report is clear that the institutional context has changed significantly. Successive political controversies, particularly in the post-Brexit and COVID-19 periods, exposed the limitations of self-regulation and contributed to a measurable erosion of trust in public institutions. Against this backdrop, the establishment of the Ethics and Integrity Commission in 2025 represents, according to the report, both continuity and reform. Now, while the EIC inherits the CSPL's advisory role, it also carries an expanded remit aligned with a stronger political commitment to restoring confidence in public life.
Yeah. Well, a central theme of the report is balance, because the UK system does rely heavily on principles-based regulation rather than rigid rules, which I think recognises that ethical judgment and political decision-making cannot be fully codified. I mean, transparency, guidance, and accountability mechanisms, frankly, are designed to support this discretion. Yet the report does highlight the persistent risk, because discretion, particularly in political institutions, can also create space for misconduct or unchecked conflicts of interest, if not matched by effective oversight and, of course, political will.
Exactly. And this tension is particularly visible at local government level. Since the abolition of a central independent regulator for local standards, responsibility for ethical oversight has largely been devolved to councils themselves. The report describes a fragmented and uneven landscape, while noting emerging proposals to strengthen local standards through clearer expectations, enhanced training, and more consistent governance arrangements.
Well, beyond traditional public office holders, the report emphasises the growing importance of regulating actors, let's say, who operate the boundaries of public life. So what I mean by that is lobbyists and private and voluntary sector organisations that deliver public services. They, there is a distinct integrity risk there. So high-profile procurement failures during the pandemic, as you've said, Dennis, underscored the difficulty of managing conflicts of interest where public and private sectors sort of intersect. So the report argues that ethical frameworks must continue to adapt to these realities.
And looking ahead, The report identifies emerging pressures that will shape the next phase of standards regulation, including digital campaigning, artificial intelligence, resource constraints, and the increasing professionalization of lobbying.
Mm.
Now, while there has been significant progress towards codification, training, and transparency, the authors of the report conclude that the enduring challenge remains unchanged, and that is striking the right balance between necessary discretion and meaningful accountability.
Yeah. And I think for professionals, the report serves as both a diagnostic tool and a reminder that ethics and integrity systems are not static and they must evolve alongside the political, technological, and social environments in which public power is exercised and be robust enough to command public confidence when it matters the most. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 15, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye bye now.